All right, I'm just gonna let everybody in. Hey guys, good morning.
Good morning, Miss Amy.
How are you doing?
Good, how are you?
Not bad at all. So I see we have Daniel here, and Cullen is actually Allison, I believe. And I've turned on my AI note taker, so hopefully we'll get some like a cool summary when we're done. And Chloe, you're here. You're not in my class, but you're here this morning. And Elizabeth is here. So Elizabeth, Miss Elizabeth, is she's an student. I'm not sure she's going to tell us where she is in college. I'm not sure exactly. But she taught. Chloe, have you met Miss Elizabeth ever?
She was my teacher for my first 2 years.
Okay, that's awesome. I was thinking that. Okay, so she taught, Elizabeth taught 2A, 1B, and 2B when she was here teaching, I believe, when she was here teaching for the studio, and that was last year, I believe, and then the year before that. And then this year she's coming back. I think she's going to teach 1C, and she's definitely going to teach some art classes. So elements of art for sure. Yeah, I think which is like an intro to art, and then Western Art History 1, which is I think a more serious class. But all right, Elizabeth, I'm gonna just stop rambling and turn it right over to you.
All right. Okay, so I can only stay until about 8:45 because I have to get to another class. So it might feel like we're kind of throwing information at you through a fire hose, but if you want to grab a pen, take notes, and everything that is on my slides, Miss Amy's going to post later on. And I think we also have note taker going. So if there's something that you didn't catch or you want to go back to and review, then there'll be ways to get to that. And also, there's going to be a couple times where I put my email up, both my emails up. So if you have questions and you want to just email me directly, you're more than welcome to. So I'm going to share my screen and let's jump in. Okay. All right. Okay. So don't judge a book by its cover, but we're actually do judge your book by its cover because the first thing that a person's going to see about your book that you're writing is the cover. So how can we make this cover the most effective cover it needs to be? So just really quick, all about me. I'm Elizabeth Pierce. If you haven't met me before, I think only two of you have. So the rest of you, hi. I'm an illustrator, currently getting my BFA in illustration. And my practice focuses specifically on books. I'm specializing in book illustration, book covers, so this is really what I've been spending years studying, and I can yap on about it for hours and hours. I think reading is very important to both writing and illustration, so a lot of my favorite authors inform my artistic practice. I love C.S. Lewis right now, I'm on a hit with that, but I also love John Flanagan, Sage Blackwood, anything fantasy, you can find me carrying around a book with it. And I create my artwork specifically to be a blend about my reading perspective, my writing perspective, and my artist perspective. And that's something that has informed a lot of my work and I've focused a lot of my classes around. So there is one key concept that I really want you to think on and chew on while we go through this talk, which is everyone gets their first idea of what your book is like from the cover. That's the first thing. So, what do you want your cover to say about your book? Think about that as we keep moving on. And just to take the pressure off, actually, wait, I skipped ahead a little bit. Let's talk about the topics. So, we're going to think like a reader, think like a writer, and think like an illustrator over all of this. We're going to ask what makes a good book cover. We're going to think like a reader in that we want to look at what's eye-catching, what's appealing. Then, how do I design a book cover? That's thinking like a writer. We're going to talk about themes, what your book cover wants to convey, how to best get that one little point across that you want your reader to first think about your book. Then finally, we're going to jump into some technical details. We're going to think like an illustrator in how do I make a good book cover. I've designed this talk to be taken either way, either you thinking and working on your own to design your own book cover, or maybe working with someone like me, an illustrator, to get that technical process along. So we'll get into some pretty nitty-gritty details, but If you're just working on your own, maybe not all of them are applicable, but they're still good to know because they're a lot of what goes on in the publishing world. Okay, so what makes a good book cover? Let's talk about design and message. And just to take the pressure off, let's talk about some book covers that have gotten published that aren't the greatest, but they still got published. Some book covers can be really weird, like this one. I don't even want to know what this book is about. Maybe it intrigues you. Um, sometimes, I mean, this is a book that's got published, and it's a book cover. Or even well-loved books like The Hobbit. They haven't always had knockout book covers, and still, all of these books have been read. I'm sure all of these books have been well-loved. So just to take the pressure off, you don't have to nail your book cover first try. Your book is still going to be a book. It's still going to be something that someone reads and cherishes. That being said, maybe we should try to avoid T-Rex hands on your book cover because that's a little strange. Maybe you like that. Maybe your book is about T-Rex hands and I just accidentally uh, knocked into that real quick. Okay, so what makes your book cover really appealing to a person is actually an artistic term. It's called visual appeal. And this kind of relates to a couple questions you can ask yourself while you're designing or while you're looking at other book covers. So, is your cover eye-catching? Does it immediately grab someone's attention? Is it unique? A lot of our book covers now, they all look kind of the same. It's like a song of snakes and daggers, and it has flowers over it. That's a trend right now. So avoiding trends. And then is your cover pleasing to look at? Because it can be eye-catching, it can be unique, but it can also be the weirdest thing you've ever looked at. Like our Roxas book back there with the T-Rex hands was definitely unique, but was it that pleasing to look at? So all of these things are something you want to keep a good balance with when you're designing your cover and when you're thinking about covers. So one way that you get visual appeal is through my favorite, color. I love color. I can talk forever about color, but there's a couple different ways that you can use color. The first way is you could use a more monochrome color, where you use one version of one color and you just use the different tones. This creates a very unified book appeal for your book cover, and it can lead to some interesting things. You can have on the left, like the Harry Potter book, a more full illustration using this technique. You could have a simpler one, like the one on the right. And monochrome colors are very good for conveying mood. Both of these books seem kind of like thoughtful or mistful. They don't exactly give like dramatic because they're blue, they're calming. So different colors can mean different things too. We're going to talk about that a little later. You can have a limited color palette book where your colors, you have like maybe three colors, like The Hobbit, it has blue, red, and gold, and black. Or like Kite for the Moon has primarily blue with some oranges and greens. So limited color palette. Again, these are also good for conveying mood, but they are more fuller illustrations. That's not correct grammar. You can have full color illustrations too. I think these are some of the most beautiful because I love color. I've said that so many times. I'm going to keep saying that, but full color illustrations give you the full range. So you kind of have to pick and choose what colors you're going to use, but it does give a fuller illustration. And yeah, I had this point here. In an effective book cover, not all of the colors are going to always be used. A good rule of thumb that I always remember, and that you probably want to too, is to have one strong color and one or two secondary colors. So it doesn't mean like if you want a full illustration, you can only have red, green, and blue, but it does mean that you have a unifying color, a color that takes up a lot of the emphasis, even if you can't always tell. So let's look at some examples, because I think that'll get my point across a little better than me just saying it. So going back to the Sea Dragon's Vault, we can see I can see about three colors, three primary colors. We have this blue all around the dragon. That's our main color, right? It's the color you see the most of, but it's not the secondary color that really grabs your attention. That's the yellow. Between this piece, there's a balance between the blue and the yellow, where the blue unifies it. The yellow makes it pop. It makes it grab your attention. I find this cover very attention grabbing just because of that nice color. You can also use color and a more in-your-face way to like make it unified. This one is almost monochrome. It's more like a monochrome plus black and white, but they use that very bright green to grab it and keep everything coherent. You only have one color, so the color is not what's competing for your attention, and you're left to look at the text. This one I like because while it is technically a more limited color palette, it's really hard to tell. So most people don't look at it and go, oh, that's limited color palette. But really, there's only about 4 colors. There you have your main color, your purple, that unifies it. Then closer in, you have a blue and an orange and a green, and really that's it. There's just different tones of those 3. So it's still a very nicely executed, very limited color palette, even though it doesn't look like it. So having a limited color palette doesn't mean you have to go back to like Urban Outlaws with that green, but it might look something more like this. Another good element to think about when designing your book cover is line. There are several good book covers that only or almost only use line. Both of these, they have pretty limited colors, right? But there's still a lot going on in this cover. The Pride and Prejudice on the right, that one I think is just beautiful. It's almost entirely based on line. It's just a lot of different elements, but the cover is still very full. And the types of lines that you use can say a lot about your illustration, what your book is going to be. The Sisters of the Winter Wood, it has a lot of looping lines, right? They all kind of interconnect together. When I look at this as a reader, I think, oh, maybe this is a story where everything's tangled together and you have to find something out. But it doesn't feel very like threatening. I think, oh, this is going to be a fun adventure because it has those nice swirly lines. Whereas you go on the right with the deadly keyholes, and I don't know what this book is about, but to me it looks like it's going to be a story full of suspense. It's going to be something where those lines make me think of tight curves and tight pacing. So thinking about what kind of line you might use in your illustration is a good tactic to kind of cue in your reader, what's this book going to be about? Another good element to use, and this one's a little tricky to get an eye for, but it's called composition. Composition means how is your book cover put together? It literally means what is your book cover composed of? And this is about shape language. So a very simple composition can be very powerful in getting one point across. You can see on The Loneliest Girl in the Universe, I made the composition here in the green. It is a rectangle for the book cover and then a circle. And that's about all you get for composition. So instead, you're stuck to look right at the girl and wonder, what's the girl about? Why is she sitting there? Why is nothing going on in this book cover? Composition doesn't have to be this simple. This one I thought was very effective. It has a keyhole composition, but all of the illustration is on the inside, so it makes you look inside and try and figure out what's going on. So a simple composition, just like this one and Loneliest Girl in the Universe, both of these shape-based compositions can really force your reader to look into your illustration and in turn want to look into your book. They'll see a mystery right on the cover and be ready to solve it. But going back to Sea Dragon's Vault, I told you guys I love this cover. Composition can also mean something more complex. For this composition, it has 3 elements that it wants you to focus on. So it splits the composition into thirds. This is something that artists use a lot that we don't always talk about in normal life, but we talk about it a lot in the art world. It's called the rule of thirds, where like the human eye likes to divide things into thirds and it makes people really happy whether they realize it or not, that something is like on this third or on this third or on these thirds. But there are 3 elements here, so it divides them equally. You have to look at the text. That's the first element, so that's represented by the rectangle on the right. You have the dragon's eye, which is that center circle. It's again something that draws you in. You look right at that eye because it's yellow, it's in the middle, it's a central circle. And then you have this hill on the bottom, which is about the 3rd element, and it's about the least important because you can tell that you want to look at the text, then the eye, then the hill. But that 3rd composition makes it feel very balanced. It makes it feel very visually pleasing. Composition is important, but different compositions or exact same compositions can mean different things. Both of these books use the keyhole composition, right? We've looked at them both in the past, but they both feel like they mean very distinct things. And this is partially due to a combination of all three of the things we've talked about. Both of these books use color in a different way. The Night books uses a blue, orange, and black, whereas the Deadly Keyholes uses pretty much just a black and yellow. They both use line in a different way. The Night books is very swirly. That kind of makes you think of magic, whereas again, we've talked about dark corners and edges and looks like a detective story for the keyhole one. And then composition is the same. But it's a good reminder to think that just because you use all the visual elements doesn't mean that your book's going to get exactly what you want across, even if you use the blue colors. So how do we get your book to say what it wants? This leads us to my second point. What do you want your book cover to say about your book? So we're thinking like a writer now. So put your theme caps on. If you've been in this class, I'm sure you've talked about the theme of your book. What do you want your book to say? What is your book about? So put that on your head and think, what's my book about? And let's start from there. So you can convey your theme with all the things we talked about. So shape, what does the composition look like? Does your book composition use rounded lines to convey something more safe? Does it use sharper lines to convey something more dramatic or on edge? Color. Are bright colors used? Those can look happy. Those can also look dangerous, depending on how bright you go. Do you use monochrome ones? Our Deadly Keyhole books use monochrome ones, and it looked pretty dangerous. You can go with a scene. Is there an important part of your book that you want to portray? Is it like the climax and they're about to climb up the hill and fight the super mecha robot beast? And like you're like, that's the most important part. I want people to see that in my book cover. Or is it maybe it's a romance story and you're like, oh my gosh, they're about to talk to each other. Finally, he brought her flowers. I want to illustrate that. There's also, you can use symbolism. You can go for a more subtle part of your book. Maybe you've written in a motif where the person has to use an hourglass to go back in time. And over time, the hourglass starts to represent not their power, but like how they feel about their losing time because they're traveling back and forth so much that they lose touch with their friends and family. And so you put the hourglass on the top of the book to make the reader think, oh, the hourglass is important. I should pay attention to it. So symbolism can be very powerful to use. Um, I've talked about this cover so much. I think we're going to move on from this one. I had something to say, but I forget what it was. This book is a good illustration of how to use color to make something feel dangerous. We use this bright limey green. It makes you think of acid. I think this book was used very well for how they use their color to make you feel. It's supposed to make you feel on edge because the colors don't really work together. So that's a good way to think about what do you want your book to say. Okay, I'm gonna stop for a second and use a case study. These covers I know very well because I drew them. So I can explain exactly what my thought process was in drawing these covers. So these covers have about 4 elements that I use to tell the readers about my story. The first one I used was color. I write all of my writing projects. I pick a central color theme and I go with that. So in turn, I use a monochrome color in my books. I use one color and black because I want my reader to look at that and be like, oh, I need to pay attention to the color green in this book. That probably won't be something you end up doing. It might be. It could be a cool idea, but most people don't look at a YA novel and think, oh yes, orange represents everything good, and that's all there is to the story. But thinking about your colors, maybe one of the main characters has blue eyes and you want your cover to be blue because you want people to kind of make that connection. My covers also use a heavy amount of symbolism. I don't really go for the whole portraying one scene in the book because I want mine to be like something the readers have to think about. Instead, in my books, I kind of think about what is the emotion I want my covers to talk about. So the green one is supposed to be kind of thinking about, oh, how do you feel lost? Do you feel disoriented if you're literally spiraling through an unknown space cosmos, how would that feel? Whereas the book on the right was supposed to talk about maybe identity and not being sure who people are, who you can trust. And so symbolism, color, those are my two big things. But those might not be the things you want to focus on, but they are some idea to keep in mind. Um, Talking about color and what does it mean? We talked about this one earlier, right? How that usage of blue, it's monochrome, just like my books, but this uses it in a very different. So the blue is supposed to think about mystery. This is a full scene illustration, and so you're supposed to like look at it and be like, what's going on? But the usage of color makes you wonder, I don't know. To me, the book feels like it's almost supposed to be kind of sad. A lot of people have a lot of ideas connected with the color blue because it's on average everyone's favorite color, and so everyone has a lot more ideas connected with it. So blue is a good color if you want to like be a little ambiguous and think, what will different people think about this? Okay, and I knew we blew through that part, but I think a lot of it will make better sense once we get into this part because we're going to talk about how do I make a book cover. So, like I said before, this part of the talk has been designed about you thinking about you making a book cover or you thinking about working with someone else who's an illustrator. So, let's start off with types of covers. This is really going to get it into your writer's toolbox to know what kind of covers you can use and what each of them might convey. Because there's a lot of different book covers, a lot of different styles out there to use. So first one, full illustration. You can just illustrate a scene. You can put maybe landmarks in the background that you like. Looking at this illustration, I immediately know who's the main character, what's special about him, that he has dinosaur hands. And I can get an idea of like the setting. We're in the mountains. I can see something in the background, a palace or something. As a reader, those are the things I know to look at to be like, oh, what's the palace? Where is he? Why does he have robot hands or dinosaur hands? So full illustration, very useful. This is my favorite kind of book cover, which is why you got to go first. You can also do a simple illustration. These are very good if you want to focus on the symbolism route. Having a simple illustration and maybe one motif or like one symbol can be very eye-catching because it's kind of visually quiet compared to a fuller illustration. But it also, since you're working with such a limited amount of like detail, it also is very good to like make that one thing stand out. So if you want one detail to stand out as opposed to a lot of details, maybe a simple illustration is what you want to go. You have type-based covers. So these are covers where you have no illustration at all, and it's just type. A lot of memoirs or books that want to appear more serious will use type-based covers because they don't want to have all of the associations that go with an illustration. They don't want you per se to ask questions about what you see on the cover more than they want you to open the book and find out for yourself. These are also about the easiest to make if you have no art skill because you can just take a program and mess with fonts. They're still kind of there's they're a little deceptive because there's a lot to go about with fonts. I'm actually in a class right now that's talking entirely about fonts because there's a ton of history, but these are good if you just want to jump in and get started with a book cover. You could do abstract shapes. Your book cover can be illustrated, but it doesn't have to represent anything. Um, these book covers are commonly used for things like textbooks and like science books. And again, it's kind of like going with the typography or type-based cover of that. They don't want you to start asking questions from the cover, but it's a little bit nicer than the type-based. It's a little bit more inviting. People see shapes and colors instead of words, and they feel a little bit more invited by the book, even though they don't know what those shapes or colors are supposed to mean. And you can do, this one is very tricky. I've only ever done one book cover like this because it can be hard to get right, but you can have the narrative cover where I've seen people interpret this kind of cover as more like a comic book. Whenever I had to take a cover like this, I interpret it as having four separate scenes and putting them together. But basically, a narrative cover is supposed to tell a little bit of a story in itself. If you want to go with this kind of cover, I recommend working with an illustrator because just it can be very easy to try and put an entire story on your cover, and that's all your reader will look at your cover and see. They'll just see the story on the cover, get distracted, and they could potentially forget to open the book. Or maybe even something a little bit more dangerous. You could look at the cover on the story and get a story on the cover and get kind of an entirely different idea of what the story in the book is about. So that's why you have to be very careful because you have a very important job to do, which is make sure something visual matches up almost exactly with something that you're supposed to read, which can be kind of hard. And then the other one, which I find a little bit tricky, but I think this one's more of a personal thought than a general thought. But you could do photo-based, where you take a photo, you take several photos, you combine them. There are a lot of books nowadays that are photo-based. With the advent of stock photography, it kind of replaced illustration in a lot of ways, where now if you get a $1.50 book at the airport, it's probably going to have a photo on it instead of an illustration. So these I personally try to stay away from just because there are a lot of photo-based illustrations now, but it still is a very good resource in your toolbox because again, you don't have to be able to draw or paint to be able to do a photo illustration book cover. And there are still a lot of very good, very effective book covers that are based off of photos. I think that was all the different types. Yes. Okay, so let's talk about you making a book cover. There are different options you can take, and some of them I recommend, some of them I don't, but they're still options, and I still want to talk about them and make you aware that they're options. So some of these might be a little controversial. You might disagree with me about what they are. That's okay. You can disagree with me, but yeah. Okay, so the first cover, let's just get the most controversial one over. You could AI generate your cover. You could go into Sora or Banana. I forget that's not Banana. There's a new one that was just released last month. It's something Banana, but it's very good. And say, generate me a book cover on Jane Eyre. I would personally caution against this one for two reasons. One of which is there are a lot of readers who would not read your book purely because it had an AI generated cover. It's AI generated AI is still very controversial in the creator space and the reader space because a lot of people are very concerned about the fact that AI models have been trained using people's art that and people's writing that normally wasn't given with permission. I personally, whenever I post my art online, I run it through a program to protect it against generative AI, but there have been a lot of people who haven't gotten to do that. So some readers might look at an AI generated cover and go, nope, not for me, and not even give your book a chance. But thinking from a writer's perspective and a designer's perspective, there's actually a bit of a stronger argument against using AI, which is AI is the average of everything, right? It takes all of the different sources, all of the different book covers, everything that it's ever been on the internet and it can look at and learn from, and it adds them all up and gives you the sum total of what those are. It's going to be a decent book cover because it's had so many book covers to learn from, but it's also going to be the most average book cover. It's going to be the book cover that is the culmination of all book covers. It's probably not going to stand out in the way that you want your book cover to. So the second it's an option, but I don't recommend it, is stock images. We talked a little bit about this. Any dime a dozen book you might find at the airport is probably going to have stock image photography cover. This is because it's cheap, it's easy, it's all the way out there, but it's also very overused. And so as a reader myself and as readers in a society, people tend to look at stock image covers, associate it with the millions of stock image covers that have come before, and go, this is probably just like all of the other books I've read before. And that again can be a little bit of a disqualifier. It can be a little bit of a hurdle to jump over. So this is an option, but if you want to take this option, try and put a little bit more work into it. Take the stock images as a base, but then change them, make them your own, make it really show that you have your own artistic hand in it, even though you might be using a stock image. And then the third option, I'm gonna have to sit on for a little bit because I think there's a very good way to use this, and I think there is a less good way to use this. So I am going to switch screens really quick. I'm going to share my window again. Let's go here. And let's talk a little bit about Canva, because Canva has a very interesting niche into the market. Canva, what it is it's a website, and their goal is to take the tools that I, as an illustrator or as a graphic designer particularly, would use and make them free and a lot simpler to use and just open to the public. And that is a very good thing because the programs I use, like Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, they're very powerful programs. They've been refined for 20 years or so. They also take months to learn how to use effectively. I won't promise to be an expert in all of those things, even though I've been working with them almost exclusively for 3 years now. And so just jumping into that, especially given that they're $20 per month subscription, that's not something most people can really do or want to do or can afford to do because it's like trying to fly. I think my professor explained it once, trying to fly a 747. You have to learn all of the controls at once. There's everything, several buttons to push. But what Canva does is it simplifies it. It makes it easier to use. It's a lot more user-friendly. You do lose a lot of like the nuanced stuff, but as someone who's not a graphic designer, you don't really need the nuanced stuff or want the nuanced stuff. So as a tool, Canva is incredibly useful. I think personally, if I were to recommend how you would use Canva, I would say start with an illustration, plug it into Canva, use Canva to format your text at the top, use Canva to figure out the layout, use Canva to make shapes, use Canva as a graphic designer. What I do not recommend using Canva for is the other side of it, which has Canva has kind of branched out into using generative AI and stock photos. And like we just talked about, those are the two things that really make your book the average of everything, right? So while it can be very tempting to scroll through all of these templates and go, ooh, this looks so good, you also have to remember everyone else has access to these templates. So if you use a template from a Canva, chances are someone else has too, and that kind of kills the uniqueness of your book. You could definitely take a template and do the same thing like we talked about with stock photography. Take it, use it as a jumping off point, and then change it and make it your own, make it unique, make it talk about your book. That would be how I would recommend it. But I would say probably the number one thing I would recommend would be, oh no, it moved. We're gonna scroll past. The number one thing I would recommend would be work with an illustrator. An illustrator does not have to be someone who looks like me, someone who has been formally trained, someone who's spent years of school. It might. Ideally, if you end up working with publishing houses, you'll get access to illustrators just through the house and it's part of the service. But there's also a ton of freelance illustrators out there too. But an illustrator can be your kid sister who's good at art. An illustrator can be your grandpa who watercolors riverscapes in his free time. An illustrator can be you working with Canva or with a drawing app on your iPad. Yeah.
Are you wanting to show the slideshow again?
Oh, we're at a stopping point. But yes, it's
Okay.
coming back. I just
Okay. I was afraid you forgot because I forgot one time and I just didn't want you to forget. That's all.
yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So I think, all right. Lost my train of thought there. Okay. But yeah, an illustrator doesn't have to be someone necessarily who looks like me. But let's talk about it because there is definitely a lot of very viable ways for you to work with an illustrator that's not like super expensive or super unobtainable. Because a lot of illustrators now work freelance. They are online on social media. They want you, people who self-publish or people who wrote their own books, to come talk to them and say, hey, can you look at a book cover for me? So let's talk about the technical details of illustration. So, step one, the brief. The brief is a written agreement between you, the commissioner, the person who is asking for an art piece, and an illustrator or an artist about what you want your art piece to look like. Part of it serves as a written agreement, so if there's any disputes later on, whether it be just verbally or legally, you can like pull up your brief and say, this is what I asked for, and this is what we agreed on. So part of it's protection, but part of it, the bigger part of it, is just describing what you want your art piece to look like. So what a good brief would include would be a visual description of the art piece. So let's say I am a commissioner. I want to commission a piece about my book, and it is about a dragon who decides to be a knight. And we're not sure how he did that. It's not part of the important right now, but it's I want to illustrate a scene about the part where the dragon is trying to fit into his knight gear because I think that's very funny and I think that is a great visual description of my book, The Dragon Trying to Be a Knight, trying to fit in knight gear. Can't get any more straightforward than that, right? So I would go and I would describe it. I would say I would like a illustration of a dragon, and I would probably go into more detail there. I'd say I want it to be a red dragon trying to fit into silver knight armor, and I want it to be in the center of the composition because I want people to look at it and go, yep, that's exactly what I should be focusing on. I want it to be incredibly straightforward, and I want my colors to be red and silver and gold and black because I want it to be very visually striking. And so that would kind of be how I would describe it. I would probably recommend going into a little bit more description. Try and be as clear as you want so you get the best chance of getting the art piece that you want. But it doesn't have to be a masterpiece. You also probably want to talk about like what's the theme? What's the emotion? What do you want the piece to feel like? We talked a lot about what your book cover can mean and what you want your book cover to say about your book. So tell the illustrator that. Say, I want this book to be about not feeling like I belong, because that's what the dragon did feel like. He felt like he couldn't belong in the knight society because he didn't fit in the armor. So I want the piece to kind of show that insecurity. Um, you also probably want to include your colors. You want to include probably reference images. So find book covers that you want your book cover to kind of feel like. Say, I like the, I forgot the word for it. Frame. I like the framing of this illustration from this cover. I like the color of this cover. I like how this cover drew dragons. Here is a stock image I found online of a dragon I think my dragon should look like. Throw all those references in there because that helps an illustrator understand what you're thinking about. And then the other thing is the technical deliverables. These are the scary words, but we're going to talk about them. So telling your person you're working with, what size do you need? What format do you need? What are the print details? This is the kind of stuff I've spent years learning about. So technical details are what your finished piece will look on, and it'll vary on what is supposed to appear. So to talk about your technical details, you want to talk about your size. So what your size is vertically, so up and down, and what your size is horizontally. And to commission this, you yourself will need to look at what your publisher wants. So go on your publishing website or your self-publishing website or your Amazon ebook website and go, oh, they say they'll publish my book in a Reader's Digest, so it needs to be 8 inches by 10 inches. I made that number off the top of my head. I don't actually remember at the moment what Reader's Digest is. Please go look it up yourself. Because if you don't specify the correct size and you try and make an illustration fit, it'll end up looking like if you tried to put a screensaver on your computer and hit stretch, and then it's Leonardo DiCaprio's face, but very flat. You also want to talk about orientation. Since we're talking book, it's pretty much always going to be portrait. So up and down instead of, I guess, hamburger instead of hot dog? No, that's folding paper. Up and down instead of like more flat. So talking about that, you also want to talk about your color profile, which I will define in just a minute, your DPI or PPI, which I will also define in a minute, and your file format, which again, defining in a minute. Let's jump into those. So color profile. These are a little boggling to wrap your head around, but I want you to take your idea of what the primary colors are, red, blue, and yellow, and throw them out the window because we're not talking about either of those. There are actually two more sets of primary colors, and these two sets are what you talk about in book illustration. So, if your image is supposed to be used digitally, so if you were publishing an ebook, then you would want to use the RGB color profile. That's the one on the left. This is what computers talk about with primary colors. It's the primary colors of light. You want your art piece to use RGB so it looks like the colors you want. If your colors and your illustration is supposed to be used in print, you're supposed to take this book and print it out. You want to use CMYK. You might recognize this from your printer. This is the color profile that all printers use. They use a combination of cyan, magenta, and yellow, and they mush them all together and you get all of the colors you want. So remembering what these two are is very, very important. I have a friend. He's currently, yes, Amy?
Should we be seeing some slides, Elizabeth?
Oh, that's odd. Can
We
everyone
haven't
not see slides?
we haven't seen any slides since the Canva thing.
That is very odd.
I
My
think you
screen
have
is
to
on.
stop. I think you have to stop your share and then click on your slides and then restart your share.
That's very odd. Thank you.
Yeah, it happened to me once. It's okay.
All right, can everyone see this? Okay, that is very weird. My screen was still actively sharing. Okay, let's see. Uh, Let me flip through. Okay, so this part will be on later. This is what we talked about with technical details, but I said it all, so hopefully you got it. Okay, these are your CMYK and your RGBs. I'll let you look at that for a minute. You can see how they kind of overlap differently and how in the center, the RGB, all the colors combine to white, and YC and YK, all your colors combine to black. That's why there's different. So, talking about this, I grabbed it, a friend who is an illustrator, and he has a piece right now where he accidentally did it in RGB and he was supposed to do it in CMYK and it got him into a lot of trouble. He's been trying to fix it for the last 2 months. You can see up on his screen, he has his profile window going, but when he had his image on his computer, it looked bright and pretty and all those blues were there. And then when he printed it out, it looked kind of dull. And this is actually a piece that's been heavily edited. He's been trying to get it back up to the correct format because he wants to show it in an exhibition. So this is not what it looked like at first. It looked even worse. But this could happen to you if you don't get your specifications correct and you like get an RGB image and you're supposed to print it. It might not look how you want it to. There's some things to avoid with that, but trying to figure out which color profile you want first is going to work a lot better. Okay, you also want to think about your DPI or PPI. These two terms are pretty much interchangeable, but different people will use different things. It pretty much just means dots per inch or points per inch, which is how much information you can have per inch in your illustration. And so DPI controls how fuzzy your image is. The image on the left here, I did in 300 DPI. It's crisp, it's clear, it's beautiful. The one on the left is the exact same image, but in 70 DPI, and it's very fuzzy. So if you want a crisp, clear, beautiful image, make sure you tell your person, I want it to 300 DPI, or else you might end up with something fuzzy because things didn't quite work out. Probably this won't be an issue. The illustrator themselves will catch it, or if you're working with someone who's drawing, they're just gonna scan it in and put it up, and that won't be a problem at all because the DPI will be automatic. But just in case, probably just throw it in there. It's really easy to say 300 DPI and everything's solved. Okay, and then these are a lot of different terms. We're just gonna gloss over them, sorry, really quickly because again, not all of these will apply to you, but I do want you to be able to recognize. So there will be a couple different file formats that you'll need for different things. So if you're working with a publisher, they're probably going to want the original document. So if you work with an illustrator, this would probably look like a Photoshop document. This is not something you as a commissioner would want because they're big and they don't work well over email because they're too big to send over email. It's something you really only want to send once. So what you'll want to work with is a PDF because you can open it anywhere. Your art piece looks good. It doesn't get too small. You don't have to worry about it. And then another file format you might see is PNG. This one's also good. It's a little harder for you to open with because not all devices can open PNGs, but they'll still work. You still should be able to like open it on your phone or something, and it has all the information. What you don't want your illustration to be is either JPEG or HDF. Both of these are phone, like you take your iPhone, your cell phone, you take a photo, it's in JPEG. It's a very small, condensed version of a file format. And if you have an illustration in that, it's going to go back and it's going to compress your DPI and it's going to look fuzzier and it's not going to look as good. So just keep an eye on that. If you see any of these, that's what they mean. This is a good slide to refer back to if you're talking with someone and you're like, what the heck are all of these letters? Besides that, not something to worry about too much. All right, we're almost done. Let's talk really quickly about workflow because I have 5 minutes left. So if you are working on your own or if you're working with an illustrator, the workflow still works the same. You'll start off with thumbnails, which are a little tiny sketch that get your idea. You can do several thumbnails in a minute and just get all your ideas out there. Once you've gotten an idea about what your sketch wants to look like and you want to start fleshing it out, you'll go on to the actual sketch, which is still kind of little, but it's a little bit more detail. Some people use color compositions after that, where they practice their colors. And then the finished composition means the finished piece. And I added a little note here because some modern artists now they do sketch and then the line art, which is the full piece, but just the lines, and then the colors, and then the render, which is talking about like adding shadows. That's what those mean. This is also a good workflow. It's not the one I personally use or have been trained to use, but a lot of people use it. So just be aware of it. And I'm almost done. I'm going to show you really quick what this workflow looked like in a piece I did, just so you have a better idea. So recently I had to do a piece that was based off of a magazine cover. I started on the left. I did several thumbnails and I wrote down a lot of stuff that stuff means. If you're working and you think better in words, or if you're working with an illustrator and you're like, I'm not really sure, then having extra words to explain what things mean can be very valuable. Then on the right, you can see kind of the thumbnail I picked. You can also see it's about maybe an inch tall and I really blew it up. There's not much detail in there. That's okay, because then I moved on to the sketch. So an illustrator would probably send you a thumbnail and say, hey, look at these. What do you like? And you'd say, I like this, but can you show me it better? They'd give you a sketch back. You can look at the sketch and say, I like it. You can look at the sketch and say, I don't like it. Could you change the girl's hat? Could you change what perspective it's supposed to be? That's like the lines and going backwards. So can you change where they are, this setting? Um, then from the left to the right, you can see I turned this into a color composition. I experimented with colors. When I went through and talked with the person who was commissioning this piece, they decided we were wanting to talk about different colors. And so it did change from the color comp, but having a color composition helps you visualize and see what the piece is going to look like at the end. Then going along, working in progress. You probably want your illustrator to send you an in progress pic, so like the one on the left, just to be like, this is what I'm working on. This is what it's going to look like. Just because communication at every step helps get a lot of headaches. And the final finished piece, for me, it looked something like this, but that'll be the finished artwork. That's what it looks like. And you can see kind of how different it looks from the color comp, right? There's a lot more detail. There's some things that got changed. So at any point in the process, that's why we take so many steps, because at any point you can look at it and say, I'd like this to change. That's a very big part. It's why communication is so important. Okay, so that's it. Thank you for listening. Here's some of my contact info. If you wanted to take a look at some of my art, that line on the bottom, portfolio@artstation.com, that's where I put some of my digital art for people to just look at. Doesn't cost anything. You don't have to do anything or make an account. You can just look. A lot of artists use portfolios to like kind of say, here's my art, here's what I can do. So practicing looking at a portfolio is very good if you want to look and work on in the future. Okay, I think I have 2 minutes. Do we want to, let me look at the chat. Let's see if we have any questions. Hopefully we have a chat. No, we don't. Okay, none of my chat is showing up. Does anyone have any questions?
There is a chat, but there's no questions yet about that.
It's odd that I don't have, oh wait, here we go.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for showing examples. Oh, and you told me you can't see your slides.
It's okay.
All right, Chloe?
Why don't you use your real name, Elizabeth Pierce, on your books? Why do you use Blackwell?
Um, I think for the biggest part, it's because I like having the creative freedom to kind of have my illustration work be under Elizabeth Pierce, but then my own books be under a kind of fun name. That's part of the reason. The other part of the reason is because since I like writing about the reader's experience, I wanted to put my authors into the books and they're actually interacting and talking. And I would feel very silly if I were like, oh, yes, Elizabeth Pierce, who's writing the book, is going off into Fantasyland because people do that. So treating it as a fictional character. It was a personal choice. I like having a pen name, keeps things separate, but it's not definitely like the standard way to do it or anything.
Thanks.
It's also can
Elizabeth.
be, oh, sorry.
No, you go ahead.
It also can be very fun to pick your own name, and you can have kind of a silly, fun name because, you get to choose your own name and it can fit the feel of your book. I know there's a lot of people like Sage Blackwood. I know for sure that she has a pen name. I don't know what her real name is. Stephen King, that's a famous pen name. I think Mark Twain. No, Mark Twain was not, but I think he did write under a pen name. I don't know. They're
Yeah,
all
he
pen
did.
names.
Mark Twain, I think, was his pen name. Pretty
Got
sure.
it.
Yeah.
I can
Thank you
remember.
so much, Elizabeth, for coming. I don't want to keep you past because I know you got somewhere to be. If anyone has any questions, I'm going to be putting this information somewhere else where they can access it later. And I'll share this recording with everyone who came. And so you ought to be okay to leave and still hear from people later if they have questions, if that's okay with you. So is that okay if they email you with your questions and things like that?
Absolutely. You can email me
Okay.
either at my artist email, which is my professional email, or you can email me at my teacher email. And I think Chloe might even have a third email for me. Chloe, any of those are fine. I still check all of them.
Okay.
But
Nice.
okay. Yeah, that's all. It was great to see everyone, and I hope you can kind of digest all of the information. I literally just threw at you. This could have easily been a 3-hour presentation, but with my schedule, I had to keep it
Mm,
pretty short. So, good luck
thank you.
writing, happy thinking, and happy art.
Yes, we appreciate it very much. Thank you so much, Elizabeth.
All right.
Thank
Bye,
you, Miss
everyone.
Pierce. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna stop my recording because I this is a class and we just used up the first 45 minutes of my class. Hi, Barb. Good to see you. Um, I can't hear you though.
Hi.
Hi.
Okay, I'm going to leave now. Thank you for letting me
Okay,
spend
you're
your party.
welcome. Thank
Loved
you,
it.
Barb. Okay, bye. Okay, guys, I'm gonna stop the recording now.